This is Business Decoded podcast with Ronnie Spellman. An informal chats with top business moguls as they share their stories of failure and success in a fun and relaxed way. Get entertained, educated, and unlock the secrets to success.
Welcome to Business Decoded with Ronnie Spellman. We are back with Dr. Jayne Gardner. Dr. Jayne Gardner, she is the mindset coach for founders and creators. And as I was preparing for the program, and thanks for coming back again, Dr. Jayne.
I can't wait. I'm really excited, as always. I
thoroughly enjoyed our conversation, but I wanted to point something out to our listeners as I was looking at your information. So this is the description that's given of you. Dr. Jayne is a bold, brilliant business thought leader who knows how to scale the kind of mindset for leaders, which is just an incredible premise for our listener. She knows there are living cultures and coding cultures inside each of our minds. And I guess you work to tease that out in CEOs and business leaders. And the other thing that I thought was just amazing, she teaches highly creative CEOs how to create a rich, thriving culture inside their minds, expanding their ability to engage their people, increase their performance, and grow their bottom line. That is why we're here on Business Decoded.
Isn't it though? And you know, it's hard for people, Ronnie, to connect the dots between self-development, learning more about yourself, having your people take these training courses, to the bottom line.
Right.
But in my book, Best Job Ever, we did research about how my process impacted the bottom line.
Nice.
So we have hardcore, really facts that show that happy people give higher income, give higher revenue.
And I speak, for 20-something years now, I've spoke a lot about that premise, not only at the executive level having happy people, but at the rank and file level, having happy employees, people that really believe in the product,
Absolutely.
the service, they're willing to do anything to help the organization reach their goal.
Yes.
And that is incredible. And you have to treat them as a leader with some level of respect and dignity.
Absolutely.
So that they can continue to thrive in their role. And it doesn't even matter if they are the plumber in the company, the housekeeping, everyone, if they really believe in value. I was with an organization recently, and so many of the people have been there 26 years and 30 years and 40 years at all levels. They didn't necessarily need promotions to the CEO level. They just needed a level of respect and appreciation for their work, and they thrived. They loved it.
That's what we found out in our research, because after Joel, the entrepreneur that helped write this book, Joel Patterson with Best Job Ever book, he actually decided to hire me. And as I interviewed his people, I realized that he wanted them to know he valued them.
Right.
And so that's why he wanted to put in a coaching culture.
I love it.
And I interviewed him at the end of the year where we put in the culture. And I said, why are we thriving here? Because they had actually 10x, I think 11x their company.
Oh, gosh.
It was really beautiful to see. But he said, I just want to know my humility, because it's the people that did this, not me.
Now, I need you to say that again for our listeners. So we have a small business owner. Let's say they're now at maybe $2 million in revenue. They see a pathway from a revenue side and based on their product or service of getting to more than that. But getting there requires exactly what you mentioned. So tell us that again. How do you 10x, 11x your business?
Yes, you 10x your people.
Right.
You know, you give them the message that they are valued, they are important, and that you care about them.
Right.
And when people get that message and feel it's sincere, authentic, they'll work their absolute back off for you.
Yeah.
And then your attrition is no longer.
Right.
And your performance goes up, your production is higher, and people want to come to work.
Right. I've often mentioned that there is a cost to turnover that people don't understand. So if a person is not in a position, let's say one person leaves in a business, filling that position requires cost, which is one item. Not having the productivity that comes out of that position is another cost that a lot of leaders don't really understand. So their position is, I can replace that person. If they're not happy here, let them go. I can replace them, which may or may not be true. But there is a cost to it, where I think it's cheaper to motivate someone, to give them the support that they need to do exceptionally well. It's amazing what happens in a business when that occurs.
Yes, and one of the things we found was with developing Best Job Ever, we got to a point where everybody was happy.
Right.
You know, and they were producing, but we still weren't quite getting that bottom line improvement, that revenue growth up. And what we saw was that presenting a culture was to be fun and they're going to be happy there. It also had a dark side.
Okay.
Because some of those people took advantage of it.
Sure.
And so what we decided was we also need to put in some accountability here.
Yeah. I was going to say a culture of accountability is still important.
There you go. So by combining those two, we ended up with an exact balance where his revenue, he was worth $3 million when he hired me and has been offered $33 million now. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, it was like, wow, that's the difference.
Right.
And it's really a simple concept. Help your people and make sure they know you care and value them.
Right.
And doesn't that even mean something to you too? I mean, I'm the same way. I want to feel like if I'm going to work for someone that they appreciate what I can do.
Exactly.
And know that if they lose me, they lose an important, integral part of that business.
Right. Now, and that's a really valid point. So this is book 3.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Tell me about book 4 and 5.
Well, book 3 is Best Job Ever. And it's the story of putting this culture in a coaching culture.
Gotcha.
But when I wrote the book, I realized that when I go into a company, I also have designed this process that they take to make themselves feel valuable to themselves, to bring their own self-worth up.
Right.
And so I also sell Best Job Ever. It is a workbook that matches the book. And then the third part of that is a journal I didn't bring today, but it's a matching set so that an entrepreneur knows that this isn't just a book that's a good little story.
Right.
It actually tells you how to raise people's morale, how to help people feel better, first about who they are, and then you relate at a different level.
Yeah, when I became a certified trainer in the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and I speak to people about that process, which sounds very similar to yours, getting the 7 Habits book is one thing. When in our program, they gave us this workbook that came with a DVD and some images and videos on the concepts, and the workbook just gave us the ability to practice the premise in a way that's different than just reading it in the book. It was incredible. The workbook was just phenomenal.
That's what, if you don't buy anything but the workbook.
That's what it sounds like. Mm-hmm. It sounds like getting all of the packages is so critical to understanding how to make the right steps and where you need to go and creating the best job ever, right?
Well, and it's my secret sauce. It's really telling entrepreneurs how to create that environment where they thrive financially as well as with their people.
Now, how long did it take for you to put together the program?
The program I put together in the 10 years I worked in a psychiatric unit. Okay. I just figured out what it is and I made the psychiatric unit. In fact, the CEO came and said, I'm losing money with you here. Right. People are leaving and they're not going to be back. Right. And so, I knew I had something when I started healing people truly. But then I realized I don't want to work with people that are mentally ill or really need a therapist. Right. So that's when I became a coach. So that book was a 10-year journey of just learning and practical experience. And the reason I ask is because sometimes business leaders think, this person created a book as kind of a marketing scheme of sorts, that they did it in 2 months. Yes. But yours, it's an evolution of 10 years of work for you to get to the point where you could offer that. And then, of course, all the work experience that you had prior to it. Well, and just my 30 years of working with people comes out in the workbook that makes it very unique to something that really helps you change and help your people feel better about who they are. So when you first get the call from a CEO or maybe let's say their right-hand person saying that my CEO needs your help. Yes. Which is kind of tricky. And many times they'll say, and he doesn't want to get your help. He doesn't want it, right? And he doesn't know that I'm calling you. There you go. There you go. But they're able to get you through the door. What's your first step when you walk through the door or on your first call? So for those people listening and they're thinking, all right, this would be great in our organization. What is your approach? I'll tell you a quick question. I work with an organization that provides some coaching as well. Sure. And I matched him with another company. They both deal in the military space. My good friend had been in the service for 20 plus years, flew helicopters. Wow. He's an incredible coach. He's a U.S. Military Academy, West Point grad, just incredible business leader. He spent a lot of years as an executive in business, plus his 20 plus years in service.
So he walks into this organization. I thought they can connect because they have that military. And it was interesting learning about his journey and getting it. It was more complicated than I thought it would be. But walking through that door and creating that connection immediately is so important. But what's your step? How do you get in? And what is that? And you gave some of that in our last conversation, but what does that look like?
Well, what I've learned about approaching anyone has a lot of influence and is very wary of someone selling them something.
And they have a lot of pride. I tell you, not to interrupt your thought,
and
but
that's good.
It's very good. It's good, but it can also create a few layers that you have to work through. So there was one company that I began helping, and their logo was about 10, 15 years old. The website was just as old. Their IT system needed a lot of help, but he designed, I didn't know this until later, he designed that logo. And it was extremely, if you can imagine kind of the Star Wars looking, through the old, it was built in that image, and it was very personal to him. And so getting him to change required just an enormous amount of work and discussions and kind of coaching. So I can imagine that when you come in and you're talking to someone about how they can continue to elevate their business, which they love, right? It's their pride and joy.
They want that.
It's really hard.
It is and it isn't.
Okay.
The reason I say that is because authenticity, I think, is what comes in. If you can just realize, instead of being transactional when you come in and just be relational and find out about their children, find out where their heart is.
Yes.
And then you can't just say, I have this program. You have to always modify it to what they need.
Right.
And to who they are. And so getting to know them, sharing a little bit about who you are on that level is where it all begins.
Right.
And then we both know if this is something that we want to do together.
Now, how long does a usual coaching period takes place? I know some in the organizations that I've worked with, they'll stay with you forever. And it maybe the first 2-3 years is a little bit more intense. And after you build that rapport and that relationship, you might meet with a CEO maybe once a month. What does yours look like on a typical basis?
Yes. It takes 3 months to go through this process.
Okay.
So I have usually a 6-month gig set up with the leader, with the CEO, so that he can see if this process is something that he would benefit from and identify with.
Right.
Okay. After that, then the rest of the year, we go to his leadership team and I'll coach them. I bring in some of my team of coaching and we start to coach everyone in the company that wants to.
Right.
Okay. And then what we have here at the end of the year, my intention is to have trained someone in that coach to replace me, in that company to replace me, so that my gig has ended, but they sustain it.
Right.
What they've learned.
So kind of a train the trainer model over the long period of time.
Yes, over the long period of time.
Okay.
Sometimes what happens is, it's usually that the CEO and I have such a personal experience that we may continue in a personal basis coaching for many years, but I'm not the coach for his company anymore. So
talk to me through the ideal company for you. Like, what does that company look like in terms of either revenue or scope or span, service type? What is the not the perfect company, but a company that makes sense, or a company that you actually often see coming to you? What does that company look like?
A lot of times the technical companies, the software, are who I specialize in because, again, they kind of picked me.
That's interesting. Why do you think that is, by the way? Why technology?
Yeah. It's because their deficit, in a way, is touchy-feely. They don't have that piece. And so I remember when I walked in my first software company, I was going to do a little breakout with about 6 of the coders, the engineers. And I got there and I told them a few things, and I could just see them there. They're going. They're starting to withdraw, they're getting on their phone. And of course, my first gig, and I was just, oh no, I'm losing them.
Right.
So what I did was I asked them, I said, well, who could tell me something that happened to them as a kid that's really impacted their life? And the one brave person, that started to tell the story that his parents got a divorce when he was 2, second grade.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, everybody was like listening.
Interesting.
And then later on, they became the tightest knit group because they started talking about real things with themselves.
Right.
And they developed their own synergy around, they were all men in this group, and they wanted to talk about their marriages, how to raise their children with me.
Wow.
But one of them told me, they said, when you came in the door, I didn't want any of that touchy-feely stuff.
Right.
And I could tell that's what you were. And I said, yeah, it kind of is. What do you think now? And he says, I get it, So it's beautiful that you're adding a part to their lives, which, like we talked about on the prior one, their home life, their children, their spouses, their partners, that part of their life is what they're needing because they do so well. They're so, perfectionistic or very creative at work on this coding and just brilliant people, high scores, the top of their class. And then they go home and not so much.
Right. Now, and that's interesting. Maybe you can give me some insight, but it seems to me that, well, one, there is no book on being a spouse. I mean, there are probably plenty of books, but there is no real manual on being a good spouse and being a good parent. And so we're oftentimes having to learn as we go, and having someone that can help have that conversation seems like an important thing to have.
It's a growth mindset. It's still wanting to change. And so I usually tell people that want to build a better family life, be it with a partner or children, is to be willing to ask this one question is, how can I be a better partner?
Right.
How can I be a better father to you?
Right.
Because it opens up, then they get to be the people in charge.
Right.
Oh, well, if you want to know that, and you get them to talk. Otherwise, they're closed down and they don't want to talk because you haven't gotten to know them. So go in with this open mindset. And that's what I'm looking for, Ronnie, in a culture.
Right.
Is people that see that we need to open up and be vulnerable about who we are, as well as be in charge and be commanding and make money and everything. We have to realize, what are we making that money for?
Right.
And complete the circle with pulling our kids and our spouses into this, what we're creating.
Dynamic. You know what's kind of neat, though, that you just mentioned, and I'm not sure that you noticed it in that moment. And I speak to executives and other people that give speeches, keynote and some other speeches, this all the time. That ability to read the room is so critical. So you read the room of those technical people, and then you pivoted to make sure that you can draw them out versus just continuing on in your comments or speech or program.
And you can, reading the room is just like reading the person.
It is.
And we talked earlier about assessments and how if you know a little bit more about that person, when you come in the door, you know a little bit more how to present yourself.
Well, and so let's transition there because when I worked at an organization that had they were implementing a personality test in their culture.
Okay.
This specific one was the Insight Assessment, but there's so many out there. And some happen pre-employment, some happen during employment. This one was one we implemented across the organization, and it grouped people by a color. So the blues were like those accountant-type personalities. The yellows were the salespeople, very outgoing. The greens were a little more shy, maybe human resource types. And then the reds were generally your CEOs and executives. They were a little bit more demanding and aggressive and the like. And so I was completely resistant. I thought this is, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners think the same, maybe depending on
another personality.
I know, another personality test. It seems silly to me. But over time, as I had a chance to really get to understand the program and what the intent was, it was a way for us to figure out how to communicate with one another. So for me to understand that I'm speaking with someone as a blue kind of more detailed oriented, speaking with a salesperson that's less concerned about detail and maybe more concerned about the transaction, just helped me to read that person, read the audience, and adjust how I approach them about a concept. So giving them a lot of detail or the salesperson may not have been the right approach. Just giving them that complete overview. Here's what the outcome should be.
Absolutely.
And leaving it at that was probably a better approach. But it sounds like you've played a lot in that space to help organizations understand how to utilize these tools.
Adaptability and growth mindset is one of the things I look for, because you're just describing the ability. That's an incredible ability, actually. Not everybody has that, to, even though they know all this stuff, to actually say, okay, I need to change me a little bit here to come at it from a different angle.
Right.
So it's an incredible person that presents that way. But if you have a whole culture of growth-minded people that are open and what Ray Dalio refers to as not only know their strengths, but know their weaknesses and willing to be vulnerable that, okay, I didn't do that so well. Let me tell you that I'm going to try this. I'm going to try to do it over. Or sometimes I ask my kids, can I have a remake on that? You know, that was really bad what I did. I yelled at you. Could I redo that? You know, but it's the awareness and the ability to accept the fact that I make mistakes and let's learn from them and let's grow up and be better people, that maturity.
And one of the most direct ways that I found that inability to communicate properly with certain people manifests is in, let's say, an email. So you're working on a person is working on a project. They decide to send the senior executive team an overview, but the email is extremely long and it's a lot of information. And then they send every document they can possibly find every attachment, because they, in their mind, they want to give them everything. And they should really rethink that. Let's give them the short version. Here's where we are. I can brief you on it. And maybe not even all 10 documents, maybe just one consolidated summary is so critical, right? Because the executives are just not going to read it. They're doing far too many things. It's far too much detail. And their opinion is that's your job. You come through the detail. But in today's world of AI and data collection, there's so much information now that we need to find ways to synthesize it. So on the data analysis side, there are all these visualization tools to try to present it in charts and graphs and simplify the information. But there's a lot of value in understanding that audience and making sure you give the person that needs the information the right set of information that fits their way of receiving that information.
You know, you're just talking about the solution, though, is AI.
Right.
Because after I coach someone, I always send them a summary of what we talked about and then what they're to do or some of their takeaways. So I used to take, it was usually 2 or 3 pages summary. And so now I just use AI and I say, summarize this for me and give me the 3 important points to send to them. And it becomes, you know, a paragraph instead of a story or a long thing. So we could do that with emails. If we would just run them through ChatGPT or whatever AI you use before we send them out and say, make this about 1/3 of that.
I spoke to an executive yesterday, in fact, and we were discussing how she's using AI now in her email. And she said, it just eases my burden because you get email you want to make sure you say it right and be succinct, like you mentioned. She says it's eased my panic. Even as an executive for this person, it just makes it so simple for her to get to the detail that's needed in
it helps
email.
us. Yes, it helps us. But we still have to remember, because so many people are afraid of it, that the human brain is much more powerful than any AI tool. But if we can realize that they work together and complement each other, and that the human brain understands emotions, it can be more adaptable. It's not as good a data processor and summary point and really analysis sometimes. We can depend on AI for that. But the human brain is just the best computer in the world, the most powerful one.
It is.
And so we can complement that with AI.
Yeah, pretty amazing. So I didn't expect you to utilize AI. That's fantastic to that degree.
But that's kind of the growth mindset, because I'm curious about all that stuff.
Right.
I want to learn everything. And then when I walk into a CEO's office, we can talk about a lot of stuff we're interested in.
Right.
Not so transactional of trying to sell something, but just enjoying people.
And what's neat about it and good about it from my vantage point to see that you're using that tool. So many organizations are afraid to test some of these new concepts. They're just, they think it'll disrupt their organization. It's a little scary for them. So I love that you're using. I had a conversation the other day with an organization, and I am amazed that their process that they just converted to is a process that was probably used 20 years ago. It was so amazing to me. And I'm thinking, you're just now getting to that. You're so far behind.
Yes.
It's so inefficient. And I was saddened to see that they hadn't evolved over the past few years. So to watch, and I presume that you probably incorporated that into some of your conversations with these leaders and CEOs.
Absolutely.
Let's figure out a better way to do your business without disrupting your business. We want to take all that you're doing great, but let's find ways to make what you're doing great even more efficient so that you can benefit from that efficiency.
Well, you know, it was interesting to me that Joel Patterson, who helped me write this, he was telling me, he said, Jayne, go out, and the people you want to sell this process to are the people, the businesses that have won awards for being best place to work.
Yes.
Because they're the people, they're eager to get that next program that they're going to send their employees through. Whereas some of the ones that are not quite so interested in whether they have a good workplace or not may not care anything about what you're offering.
Right.
So
I love it.
Yes.
Well, so I want to mention a few items because not only do you have your books, but you are extremely well qualified and certified. So I want to mention some of those as we wrap up this show that I find astounding. So you're a master certified coach by the International Coach Federation. You're a licensed professional counselor.
Correct.
You are a licensed marriage and family therapist, and you have your PhD. I'm not sure what any company can get more from someone.
I'll tell you what you can get more of, because you left out. I've got 5 children.
Well, that's
where
huge.
I learned everything I know. You know, that's just it. It's the relationships. That's my deal. That's what we live for. That's at the end of our lives. It's not going to be those credentials. It's going to be the people that we have helped transform their lives and who remember that and believe in us.
Yeah, that is so true. There's a quote that I started using at the end of my undergraduate career. It's a quote by David P. Gardner, and I still use it today. But he was a professor and he was a college president. He says, we learn simply by the exposure of living. Much that passes for education is not education at all, but ritual. The fact is that we are being educated when we know it least. So what he's saying, kind of like with the kids, is that we're learning from just living day to day. And that is such an important lesson. Like just the little things we do. And I tell my daughter this all the time, who's now in college, attending a speaker's event, every little thing. She's headed to Washington, D.C. for a special event. She's been there a lot, but she's now going on her own without the family with a bunch of friends. Just the experience of traveling there and managing that experience on her own is just huge. She's traveled abroad on her own. Beautiful. But that day-to-day learning is just so invaluable. Raising a family, you get so much out of it. And as we mentioned earlier, you learn so much from those kids. They are so honest.
I've got a short, funny story.
Yes.
So my first grandchild was born about 11 years ago, and my daughter and her partner asked me to go to this training that the hospital had not on birthing, but just on how to be a good grandparent.
Right.
Well,
wow.
Well, but I had all those credentials. I was not worried about that. I knew parenting is my deal. So I went kind of dubiously. But you know, the one message they gave me that just surprised the heck out of me, they said that do not give advice to those new parents. And I went, huh? I mean, that's who I am. I know so much. Why can't I share that?
Right.
But no, it's best to ask questions.
That is fascinating.
Isn't it though?
It is. So what do you think you're learning? You have 2 11-year-old grandkids.
Yes, I have 5 children and 7 grandparents. It's just that we relate equal to each other. And especially you're going through that transition with your daughter. When they grow up, you got to let go of some things that you may feel like you need to tell them and let them learn it on their own and then be there to support them. That's what I want to maintain, that relationship.
I'll tell you this one quick story, Omari, and I know we had our program, but 2 items. When my youngest daughter was really little, we were in the car and the window was rolled down. And she has something that just seems kind of obvious as an adult. We've seen kind of the evolution of vehicles from the hand roll downs to the button roll down windows. But the window was rolled down and she must have been, 3 or so. And she says to me, where does the window go when it rolls down? And I thought that is really insightful. For her, it just disappears.
Questions, yes.
Now, understanding that it goes between the doors was just, and I thought that is absolutely brilliant.
It is.
And I'm not sure what I said.
Yeah. Well, there's not an answer, but to just be so happy that they're asking that question.
It's being that, we discussed being inquisitive.
Yes.
Back when you were 5, you were inquisitive. And as we become adults, not losing that is so important. And then the last one, and I'll end with this, and then I'll let you have the last word. But my older daughter, she was probably, 15, 16 at the time. And the younger one had asked her a question. And so I turned and looked at them kind of mid-conversation. And I see this look on my older daughter's face. And your kids after a while. You kind of know the expression. It wasn't a bad expression. It was just an expression that you want to question. So I asked her what's going on. So she had answered my younger daughter's question. And then my younger daughter asked another question. And then this is what my daughter told me. I said, well, what's going on? And she said, well, I'm trying to tell her what I told her, but in a different way. Right, essentially. So she was in her mind, she was processing the question because she'd answered the question, but the younger one didn't understand it. So she said, I'm trying to tell her what I told her without saying the exact same thing, essentially. And I thought, no, that's
a whole
insightful.
class right there.
And what was unique is that she was really patient about the question.
Oh, yeah.
It wasn't, I already answered that question.
Or annoyed or anything.
Right. It was, I'm trying to tell her what I told her without telling the same thing that I told her. And I thought that was absolutely brilliant. I learned so much from the kids. So you speak about learning through living. I just learned so much from their questions and their thought processes. And sounds like you're doing the same thing with your CEOs.
Absolutely.
So what would you tell the executive listening to this program? What thought would you leave them with as we close out our second interview?
Find a coach, someone that can tell you and ask you questions, but can also share with you the other side of yourself that maybe you can't see.
Right.
That's the most valuable experience I've ever had with my coach. And it can be kind of I lose my breath sometimes when she says, well, can I share with you something I'm seeing here? And I know what's coming, but that's living, that's growing, that's evolution, is getting better at who we are every minute. That's our job. That's our purpose.
I love it. Dr. Jayne Gardner, thanks again for joining us. Where can someone find you?
I have a website, drjaynegardner.com, DrJayne, Gardner. And you can find lots of assessments there, articles that I've written, just a wealth of free items on my website. So, yes, and sign up for a free assessment with me, and I can, analyze the blind set. The blind side assessment.
It's been a pleasure getting to know you. I love your approach. I love how you go about helping leaders become even better leaders. I think all of us need a coach in our lives to provide that guidance. I was watching a basketball player recently, and they were talking about their basketball coach and how they've given them so many life lessons to carry into their business career later. And he said something to this effect that our basketball career isn't going to last forever. And what we will take away from this experience and being with this coach is what's going to carry us through the rest of our career journey and our life journey. And what you're doing for these CEOs and business leaders and executives is just so important.
Such a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us on Business Decoded with Ronnie Spellman.
Thank you for listening to Business Decoded podcast with Ronnie Spellman. Please be sure to subscribe and share, and stay tuned for more incredible Business Decoded episodes.